We will now interrupt your regularly scheduled programming for this Good Old Blades micro podcast.
In my recent interview with David Nemerson, I had been thinking a lot more about what he mentioned about like the symbiosis between collectors and makers, and I kind of wanted to expound on that a little bit more because even though we covered it, and I think you might get the point at a high level, I kind of want to go into like what sales looks like and what investment looks like for the maker, and how makers and collectors and users or customers kind of all play a role in how, at the end of the day, a custom maker or a handmade knife maker actually gets paid and makes some type of living or reputation for themselves. Okay, so the let's talk first about the sales process itself for a maker. So typically you have two different avenues that a maker will go down for sales. They'll either keep books, which are individual names and what it is that they want, or no books, and it's they make what they want. And within those two categories, so when a maker keeps books, typically if they're a full custom maker, you get to pick everything out. So maybe they're making a blade custom for you based off of a design, or maybe they're doing a rendition of something, or maybe one of their models, and you get to choose everything. So in their books, they'll have every bit of the specification for how they build that, and then when they get done with it, you pay for it. Sometimes they'll ask for a deposit. Sometimes they won't. It just depends. And then other makers will do like they make what they want. So it's their patterns or designs that they really like or something like that. And whenever it's time for you to come up on their books, then they'll usually ask for money, or if they're done with it, they'll ask for money. So there's a lot of different ways to accept money for things. But on the no book side, you have categories, or inside of that category, you have subcategories like first come, first serve, lottos and raffles. It's typically it. And then you have like show stock. All right. So the idea is each sales avenue that you go down, it has its own like marketing and sales pitfalls. All right. So when you're doing books, you rely very, very heavily on the person that's going to be on your books and that's occupying a spot and also contributing towards what you think your lead times are going to be, actually paying up whenever it comes time for their knife to be ready. All right. Some makers will make the thing, and then if a customer does not buy that thing or doesn't want to buy it because they're like, okay, well, I'm broke now. Sorry, I wasn't a year ago. Then they'll try to sell it off. Well, then they could lose money on that. Maybe nobody wants the particular configuration that this customer was asking for. You could also have people who just genuinely, want to get on your books and think they'll have the money, but then they don't, and then they want to skip further on the line or whatever. Well, I mean, then they go directly back to the very back of your books and start from there. So, I mean, if you have 1, 3, 5 year books, then they lose their opportunity. I don't know. Books. I feel have a little bit of pressure associated with them too, because if you want to do something interesting, if you want to do something that is outside of the vein of your books, then you kind of gotta be clear about that pretty upfront with your customers. That I take orders that are interesting to me. I make stuff that's interesting to me. I also keep books, and this is all things factored in. So I want to be able to make other knives on the side in addition with filling my books. And so this is what my lead time is for, all things considering with whatever you have on your books. Right? I hope that makes sense. With no books, you don't have that same kind of pressure, but you have to be able to make a knife, and then you have to be able to sell that knife. And it becomes a lot more difficult when you do no books in some ways, because whether it's first come, first serve, lotto, or raffle, like whatever these sales mechanisms are that you're using, 100% of what you make is invested upfront by you, and you circulate the thing that you've made in the market and hope that somebody picks it up. I ultimately like this model more because there's less pressure to build things that maybe I want to build one or two of, but I've had situations where I've made one of something and a lot of people like it and they're like, okay, hey, can I get on your books or whatever? And then I'm making like 20 bird and trouts. And at some point in time, even though I don't mind making anything that I make, 20 of the same thing can really just be a pain. I don't know. When you don't keep books, first come first serve is the best. If customers are looking for your knife, they see it and they can grab it. They don't have to wait, right? Lotto's iffy, right? Because you have to have a few people who want to buy your knife, and so lotto's just let me explain that. A lotto is you have so many people who might say that they want to buy it, and it's whatever your strike price is. So, like, let's just say I'm selling something for $900, and maybe there's 4 or 5 people that are like, okay, I'm in for this lotto, and then whoever wins the lotto pays the price for the knife. With raffles, you're basically selling seats. So if it's $900, it's separated out between so many seats or so many spots, and individuals buy those up until the $900 have been met or the total spots have been met. Sometimes there's like open lottos too. I'm kind of going back to the lotto thing where you can set, like there's bidding. So it's more of like an auction than it is a real lotto. But it's an open end where anybody can jack up the price and has to pay for that allegedly. I've seen some where the top end bid, they won that thinking that they might have been outbid, and then they're like, oh, sorry, I don't have the money right now. So each one of these comes with a certain amount of risk to the maker. And then if anybody drops out of things, you got to go back through and do a bunch of paperwork and figure out who was the last person to respond, who's entitled to the next spot, and it just takes a long time. So with each one of these, I think it's kind of, pick your poison, right? Whether it's books or whether it's no books, there's pitfalls to each. When talking about kind of the symbiosis of maker to collector or user, I think it's important to understand that a given knife costs something to make, and the most expensive component of that is typically the maker's time. Now, materials for a standard knife, if you can keep it within $100, well, each knife costs at least $100. But let's talk about some of these like fads that are pop around where people want Westinghouse micarta like Ivorite, or they want stainless Damascus like Damasteel or something. Well, something that you have to be aware of is that Damasteel's current price is somewhere between $11 and $18 per inch of material. So, maybe you can get a few blades out of a few inches, depends on how wide and long it is, but you're talking 30 plus bucks for the blade itself. Then you have, if you're doing pocket knives, you might have springs, or you might have other mechanisms that you have to take into account. All that adds up. Sometimes, Ivorite can go for, $400 or $500 per scale set, and you might only get one knife out of it. So you think about that. So instantaneously add another $500 onto that. It's very difficult for a maker to produce certain types of work when they don't have books and they don't have anybody who wants that, unless they're in a very highly demanded maker. To put $400 worth of scale material on it, another $700 in Damascus or whatever, and all the time that it takes to make sure that you don't screw up those precious materials is a lot of money. And so, any way that you look at it, when you get a blade from a handmade or custom maker, you are almost never paying for what that knife actually costs to make from a time perspective, because like other professionals might get $200 or $250 an hour, but rarely will a knife maker even break $25 an hour, which is not an incredible amount when you think about it. They might have 15, 20, 50 hours in a very basic thing, up to hundreds or thousands of hours, depending on if they're doing something in the art knife or very sophisticated realm of things. And so you got to remember, whatever you're paying for knives is not enough. And I don't mean that in a condescending way. I mean it in the sense that a maker is almost never charging that much for their time. It's cost of material plus a little bit of time usually. And that's kind of where the market kind of caps out at. So when a collector is willing to say that they will buy whatever a maker makes, or they have a particular preference on things, like maybe they like stag, sandbar stag, red stag, whatever. Maybe they like jig bone, certain types of Macart or whatever, and they like a specific pattern. Anytime a potential customer says, "Hey, I like these things, and whatever you make, I love the way that you do things. Just give me whatever it is. I'll be waiting." It's a lot easier to make the thing, because if I have $200, $300, $400 on something or more, right? There's lots of makers on the upper end of things that spend tens of thousands of dollars on materials. So I'm not really complaining, but think about it from my tier of the kind of knives that I make, which is typically the $300 to like $2,000 range. In a situation like that, I might have $400 in it. If they're willing to buy it from me, and I know that there's that business waiting, I will usually try to push the envelope a little bit more and make something that maybe doesn't feel so safe to me. Like maybe I'll put certain embellishments on it, or maybe I'll do certain things that just to me push my art more. And I like that relationship because I can be free with things, but at the same time, I also know that there's a higher likelihood that I'll get paid for it, for the material investment and everything. And if you're listening to this and you're a collector, or you're a user of knives, I think it's important just to remember that you are vitally important to makers and keeping their craft alive. And I've seen over the years lots of makers wash out because they've gotten into going full-time thinking that the market was going to sustain them, and then it kind of dries up. There's only so much innovation you can do in an area. But if somebody rides a fad, thinking that their knives will always be purchased from people, and then it dries up, well, then they have to go back to reality. I see a lot of slip joint makers now. There's kind of been a paradigm shift with slip joints and pocket knives, where everybody's like, well, everybody loves pocket knives because they fit in the pocket, so let's make pocket knives. And the problem is that as the economy tightens up, there's lots of really, really, really good and longevity-driven makers out there that are producing phenomenal work for not that much money. And it's really difficult to break into the pocket knife market. It gets even worse when you think about the fact that there's only so much money to go around, and there's several niche, meta niches involved with pocket knives, especially slip joints. So it's one of those things where the more reassurance that we makers have that we can make something and sell it, the more that we can expand into, more sophisticated forms of art, like more like tighter tolerances and embellishments and materials and things like that, where if you have to make an economy knife and you have to get it out as quickly as possible because you can't sell it for $500, you have to sell it for $325. That amount of money makes a bunch of difference, and you have to make things in a semi-production manner and just try to get them out and sell them as quickly as you can in order to make ends meet. And that's difficult because there's if you're a handmade knife maker, semi-production and production work is difficult because it's a completely different mode of thinking when you're making things. You're not really making to an incredibly high art standard. You're building users, and you want it to meet a certain specification on quality and everything, but there might be some flaws. And those are a lot easier to catch and spend, an additional 10 hours massaging out scratches and getting symmetry correct and all those things, whatever is the last, 5% of a knife. It's easier to invest in that when, you're getting paid, extra to do all that work. But if you're not, then, 10, 15, 20 hours, that might be, 2 or 3 more fixed blades or, another slip joint or something like that you can get double the money for. So you kind of got to think, the economy of it. If it is a business and if you're doing it for more than just a hobby, that you dump a bunch of money in and hopefully it supports you in the back end. Those are things that we think about a lot. So collectors, vitally important. I mean, I can't stress that enough. It is very, very important to also give feedback to makers and let them know, if they're valued and encourage them, because it's very easy sometimes to get caught in the weeds of making things, and sometimes a little bit of feedback that's not from makers, but it's from the customer base is highly motivational in order just to keep things going. So I hope that helps and gives you some ideas. And again, if you have any questions or want to know more about these avenues, you're more than welcome to let me know. Thanks.